did a video a couple of months ago on the Bat Creek Stone. The Bat Creek Stone is a Native American artifact found in a Hopewell mound in Tennessee that contains some writings on it that appear to be ancient Hebrew. So it's potential evidence of Hebrew writing in the ancient Americas and thus evidence for the Book of Mormon. In that video, I presented some background about the Bat Creek Stone and presented why I feel like it's the best evidence of ancient Hebrew writing in the Americas, and part of that is because of the nature of the find, and I go into more of that in that prior video. But since then, just last week, there was an interview conducted between some expert non-Mormons discussing the Bat Creek Stone, and even though they're not members of the church, the discussion was surprisingly supportive of the authenticity of the Bat Creek Stone, and there was some new information which came out in that discussion supporting the authenticity of the Bat Creek Stone and thus supporting the Book of Mormon. And so in this video, I want to present and share some of the information that came out in that discussion and share it with you. So first, I'm just going to show the video that I did previously on the Bat Creek Stone. This was 2 months ago. It's called "The Best Evidence of Hebrew Writing in Ancient America," and this is the. I'll also put a link to it below. Okay, now the video that I'm talking about now that was just done this last week was done on this Mormon Book Reviews channel. It's run by a non-member. He's evangelical. He's a good friend though. So his name is Stephen Pinecker, and he's this person here. And then for this episode, he brought on two experts to talk about the Bat Creek Stone. The first one he brought on was the first one we brought on was Scott Wolter. Scott Wolter is a geologist. You may know him from the America Unearthed series that he did on the History Channel. But by profession, he's a geologist and specializes in studying rocks. He then was asked to take a look at the Bat Creek Stone, and he did study the Bat Creek Stone and concluded that it is authentic. And so that's why he was invited on. And then also invited on was Dr. Nehemiah Gordon. And Dr. Gordon is an expert, also not a member of the church, but an expert in biblical studies. And I'll just link here where you can see Dr. Gordon's a website, and it gives a little bit of the information about him. So as it indicates here, he has a PhD in biblical studies, and he's worked in translation, including with ancient Hebrew manuscripts. Okay. So now in this video, they talk about the Bat Creek Stone, and like I said, share some pretty good information. So I'm going to put it at a full screen here, and I'm going to show little clips of it. The first one will start, well, they'll just do the introduction. We'll start about the 17-second mark here.
I'm really excited. We'll be talking about the Bat Creek inscription, which is a Paleo-Hebrew inscription that was discovered in a Smithsonian Institute archaeological excavation in 1889.
Okay, so that's sort of the introduction. Now, because I've done a previous video on the Bat Creek Stone, and this video is over 2 hours long, I'm only going to play a couple of portions of it. But the first one I want to play is, so it's about the 24-minute mark here, and it's where Dr. Gordon will confirm that the inscription is a Paleo-Hebrew. So we'll stop about somewhere around here.
Sure, give us all the details. That's what
okay. All right. Well, you asked, you got it, brother. So when you look at this inscription, and before I get started, I want to ask you a question. Being a Hebrew scholar, is this Paleo-Hebrew? What is this text?
Obviously, it's Paleo-Hebrew.
Okay.
And now look, now Mertz, I think it was Mertz, who said it was Phoenician.
Mertz, yeah.
The difference between Phoenician and Paleo-Hebrew, that's what doctors call different.
Okay, so anyway, he says multiple times, he confirms it is Paleo-Hebrew. I'll skip the part. He kind of compares the lettering there's the aspect of Phoenician, but because it includes some Hebrew aspects, he confirms that without a doubt it is Paleo-Hebrew. So that's the first additional piece of evidence is, again, we have a non-member Hebrew scholar confirming that the writing on the stone is Paleo-Hebrew. He then questions, but it's just a question of whether the rock is authentic or not, or whether it could be somebody forging a Paleo-Hebrew on there. And so then it gets to Mr. Wolter's discussion and analysis that he's done on the rock. And so we'll go ahead and we'll talk to that, skip to that. All right, so, and actually I'll just go ahead and capture, so we'll jump to 31 minute. He'll talk a little bit about the first thing that he confirmed was that the rock is local to that area. Again, here are the things that were found with a Bat Creek stone. The stone was found in a Hopewell mound. It was found with some wood pieces. The wood pieces were carbon dated to pre-Columbus times. And then there were also bracelets, and we'll talk about the bracelets in there. But first here he confirms that the stone is local.
It's an ironstone concretion. And one of the reasons I went to the site was to see if the local geology was consistent with this stone, because one of the questions that I often get from people when I look at artifacts like this, well, the stone that it was carved in, is it indigenous to the area? Did it come from the old world? Is it from the new world? And in this particular case, these ironstone concretions in the sedimentary rock are quite common in the area of the Little Tennessee River where mound number 3 was. So presumably this stone was from the local area, and it may or may not be important, but it's a conclusion that I drew.
It was the first additional piece of information that he provides in this video. It's just a confirmation that it's not a matter of the rock being brought from the old world or anything like that. This was clearly a rock from that local area. Then he'll get to a discussion of the context of the find with the wood and the brass, with the bracelets, and he'll talk about how give some additional information about the copper bracelets. For this, we'll jump to the 40-minute mark. About here is fine.
Carbon 14 test here. It has a 730 something year range.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. And then, so anyway, again, by association, if the wood dates to that period, then all the other artifacts date to that period or older. So that would be the conclusion that I would draw. Now, the copper bracelets are also very interesting because they weren't copper. They were tested and they turned out to be brass. And if you look below, you can see the test data for the elemental composition.
This is interesting and new. So in my video, the information I had received and that was out there was that the bracelets were copper. Now, in my prior video, I showed how the copper bracelets, the method of manufacture of them, the way that they were formed into a C-type shape, pounded into a C-type shape as opposed to a bracelet being made of wire, pointed to an ancient type of manufacture. But it turns out that the evidence is actually even better about it because it was not a pure copper. It turns out that it was actually brass. And then what Mr. Wolter will say here is that the type of brass actually matches a type of brass that's found in ancient Egypt. Now, again, Mr. Wolter is not a member of the church, and he's not trying to push or support the Book of Mormon. He's just trying to figure out the curiosity for this artifact and what it means in terms of connection with the old world. But for us as members of the church, we know that, for example, brass is something that said that the Nephites used. In fact, and the brass that they had, for example, the brass plates, most think that was writings of Joseph of Egypt, which are said to have been on there. Joseph of Egypt was obviously lived in and came out of Egypt. And so you have the possibility of a type of brass that's used in Egypt is very interesting and potentially supportive of the Book of Mormon. So I'll continue to play this.
Of copper and zinc, which is what brass is primarily comprised of. And in this case, about little over 3% lead. But what's really interesting is if you look over on the far right, a first century Egyptian statue that was made out of brass has a very similar composition. So the suggestion is maybe this is old world brass works that was done here, presumably in the New World, or they were, brass bracelets that were brought over from the old world. You can speculate all you want, but
I'll just note here again that, and I've done a separate video in terms of the ability to work metals or smelt metals. The thought has been, the dominant thought has been, is that Native Americans did not have the ability to do metallurgy, that they only took naturally found metals and would shape them, but did not have the ability to do furnaces. But from the Book of Mormon, it says no, that in particular Nephi came over. He had the metallurgy, the ability to smelt metals. In a prior video, I've talked about some evidence in the Ohio area that points to furnaces and in particular the formation of iron by the Hopewell anciently. This is an additional piece of evidence showing the potential ability to do metalworking, including the making of brass, which is referred to in the Book of Mormon.
Presumption for a long time was that they were copper, and it turns out they're not copper. They have been metalwork. So there was actually a forge that was used to create this alloy of brass. And that begs some very interesting questions. Where did that come from? Native Americans were not believed to have understand metallurgy. So could it have been somebody that came from the old world? I mean, all these things are pointing to, an explanation that doesn't fit with what archaeologists are saying is Native American.
And then, so that was another significant piece that came out in this conversation, and I'm glad that Mr. Peinecker, Stephen, set up this conversation. Another portion of the video that I'll skip to so that you can hear is a little bit of Mr. Wolter's discussion and analysis of the inscription and the weathering in this inscription, and how he came to the conclusion that the weathering in the inscription showed that it was an ancient inscription. And this will be at the 1 hour 38 minute mark approximately. So we'll jump to that. That's good enough there.
Talk about him at the end, okay? About who John Emmert was and what happened there. Okay, so let's keep going. So now what we're doing is we're taking a closer look at the inscription, and what we don't see in any of the carved lines that are part of the Paleo-Hebrew inscription is any of that silt. It's gone. That would have presumably been there when it was carved, because the fresh scratches tell us what a freshly carved character looks like, and it's got silt and sediment at the bottom of the grooves, and we don't see it in any of these grooves of the Paleo-Hebrew inscription.
And so again, what this refers to, if you'll recall, is the Bat Creek stone has this Paleo-Hebrew inscription on it, but then also on the stone are a couple of other marks that occurred while it was in the custody of the Smithsonian, so within the past 150 years. And so since there were scratches that were made in the stone within the past 150 years, what Mr. Wolter is saying that he could do is, with a special microscope, he could look down into the inscription and compare it to the other marks that were made in the stone while it was with the Smithsonian. You could look at the amount of weathering between the two, and that through that he could tell that the Paleo-Hebrew inscription was significantly more weathered. There was no longer any of the silt or other types of things that he could see in the more recent markings. And so that helped convince him for sure that the inscription was ancient. All right. Now, one other thing that Mr. Walter mentions in the video too is the attacks on the the theory for the Smithsonian, the mainstream theory is that, well, if it's a forgery, it would have had to have been done by the person who found it, a man whose name was John Emmert. And in my past video, I talked about how Mr. Emmert had no motivation to create a forgery. In fact, he didn't even know that it had paleo-Hebrew on it. He never sought any publicity for the find. He never sought any money for the find. He was never a proponent of the idea that the Native Americans were Hebrew or lost tribes or anything. In fact, there's a letter from him to Mr. Thomas, his boss, which indicated that he didn't think that that was the case when he was investigating the Native American mounds. So all of the motivations and things like that don't fit the concept or idea of there being a forgery. Now, what Mr. Walter says is that the Smithsonian said, well, it must have been forged by John Emmert, and Scott Wolter responded, well, wait a second, you have over 200 digs done by the Smithsonian, done by John Emmert for the Smithsonian. Are you bringing into question all of these other digs that you've done? And the Smithsonian kind of deleted their statement on that fact. So anyway, I recommend the Mormon Book Reviews video on it. I'm thankful for the new information that came out. Again, the key pieces of new information that came out is we had Dr. Gordon, a non-member Hebrew scholar, confirm that the inscriptions are Paleo-Hebrew. We had Mr. Walter, who is a professional geologist and studies rocks, talk about his analysis of it and again confirm that the inscriptions were ancient. He additionally provided information about the bracelets being brass, which means that the Bat Creek stone points to two things now. One is the use of the ancient Hebrew writings in the Americas, but also, since it's there with the bracelets, that points to the use of metallurgy among the Hopewell anciently. Again, these are things that are big for supporting the authenticity and truthfulness of the Book of Mormon. All right, if you have information you'd like to share or comments, feel free to put them below, and I encourage you to like and subscribe. Thanks.